Marcus Reed stood in the foundation office with an envelope gripping his hand tight enough to crease the paper.
I
The
won't be
room
a
smelled
part of
like
this.
polished wood
We
and
have to be
ambition.
united on this.
Floor-to-ceiling
My principals
windows
won't
framing
allow it.
Chicago's downtown
We
skyline
must address this
in
challenge
late afternoon
directly.
light
The
that
current
felt
approach
too
is
bright
not
for the
sustainable.
conversation he
We
was
need a new
about to
strategy.
have. Victoria Brennan sat behind her desk with fingers steepled, waiting, her expression unreadable in that way powerful people practiced until it became reflex. The envelope contained a single page. Marcus had rewritten it 4 times before settling on words that felt true without sounding ungrateful. He placed it on the desk between them with the careful precision of a man who understood that gestures carried weight. Victoria's eyes dropped to the envelope, then lifted back to his face. Something flickered there, brief as a candle in wind. "I appreciate the gesture." Marcus kept his voice level, professional, the tone he used when explaining to donors why certain repairs couldn't wait. "But I can't accept this." "Why not?" The question landed simple and direct, no cushion of platitudes or corporate smooth talk. Marcus had expected resistance dressed in persuasion, not genuine curiosity. He shifted his weight, aware of how his borrowed shoes pinched at the heel, how his best shirt was 3 years old and fraying at the collar. "Because my son is watching." The words came out harder than he intended, carrying an edge he didn't know lived in his chest until it emerged. "I won't teach him to take what he hasn't earned." Victoria leaned back in her chair, the leather creaking soft as a sigh. Her hands fell to the armrests, and for the first time since he'd walked in, she looked less like a CEO and more like a person trying to solve a puzzle that kept changing shape. "What if it's not charity? What if you've already earned it?" Marcus opened his mouth to answer, but the question hung in the air between them with a weight that demanded consideration he wasn't ready to give. The silence stretched, filled with the distant hum of traffic 17 floors below and the mechanical whisper of climate control that kept the office at a temperature he found too cold. 3 months earlier, Marcus had never imagined standing in this room. 3 months earlier, his life moved in rhythms so familiar they required no thought, survival choreographed down to the minute. 3 months earlier. Thursday morning arrived at 5:45 with the alarm clock's electronic beep cutting through darkness like a blade through butter. Marcus's hand found the button before the second beep could sound, muscle memory from 3 years of practice ensuring Jordan never woke early. The apartment held that specific quiet that came before sunrise, when Chicago streets were still mostly empty, and the radiator hadn't yet clicked to life with its morning complaints. He moved through the bedroom in the dark, collecting clothes by touch, dressing in the bathroom with the door pulled almost closed so the light wouldn't spill into the hallway where Jordan slept. The mirror showed him what it always did. A man pushing 35 who looked 40 on bad days. Circles under his eyes that never quite faded, no matter how much sleep he managed. Shoulders that carried invisible weight in the set of their slope. He'd shaved the night before to save time, splashed cold water on his face now to shock himself into full consciousness. The kitchen was small enough that 3 steps took him from the refrigerator to the stove. He pulled eggs from the carton, milk from the door shelf, mixed pancake batter in the blue ceramic bowl Sarah had bought at a yard sale 6 months before the accident. She'd loved the color, said it reminded her of summer sky. Marcus used it every morning because routine was armor and memory was fuel. The pancakes bubbled and set on the griddle while he packed Jordan's lunch. Peanut butter sandwich cut diagonal because Jordan insisted triangles tasted better. Apple slices in a plastic container. Juice box, 3 cookies he'd baked Sunday night. Marcus checked Jordan's backpack hanging by the door. Homework folder, library book due back today. The drawing Jordan had been working on all week folded carefully between 2 notebooks. "Dad?" Jordan stood in the hallway entrance, rubbing sleep from his eyes, wearing the Spider-Man pajamas that were getting too small, but that he refused to retire. His hair stood up in the back where he'd slept on it wrong, and his gap-toothed smile was slow to arrive, but genuine when it came. "Morning, buddy. Pancakes in 2 minutes." Jordan shuffled to the table, climbed into his chair, reached for the blanket draped over the back. Sarah had made it the year before Jordan was born, crocheted squares in blues and greens that she'd spent 8 months perfecting. Jordan carried it everywhere until he turned 5, then limited it to home, then just to difficult mornings. This morning qualified. Marcus flipped the pancakes onto 2 plates, added butter and syrup in the exact amounts they both preferred, carried them to the table. Jordan was already drawing on the paper placemat Marcus set out every morning, red crayon working in broad strokes to create something that looked like a person surrounded by tools. "What are you making?" "Dad Hero fixing the art center." Jordan didn't look up, focused entirely on getting the details right.
"See, this is you with the wrench, and this is the broken pipe you fixed so the kids could paint without water everywhere."
Marcus felt something tighten in his chest, equal parts pride and pain. Jordan had been calling him Dad Hero for 6 months, ever since the flood at Riverside Community Arts Center had threatened to close the building, and Marcus had spent 47 consecutive nights making repairs. Jordan didn't understand the financial impossibility of what Marcus had done, working without overtime pay because the center was nonprofit and already drowning in red ink. He just knew his dad had saved a place where children got to be children, regardless of what their parents could afford. "Eat your pancakes before they get cold." They ate in comfortable silence, punctuated by Jordan's occasional observations about school, about the kid in his class who'd lost a tooth yesterday, about how Ms. Patterson said they were starting a unit on butterflies next week. Marcus listened with half his attention, while the other half ran calculations. Rent due in 12 days. Electric bill overdue by 3 weeks, but not yet at shutoff threshold. Jordan's shoes wearing through at the sole and needing replacement before winter hit hard. Sarah would have known how to make these numbers work. She'd been the planner, the one who could stretch $1 until it wept. Marcus just worked more hours and hoped math would eventually bend in his favor. 20 minutes later, they were in the car. Jordan buckled in the back seat with his backpack and his blanket, Marcus navigating side streets to avoid construction on the main route. The sun was breaking over Lake Michigan by the time they pulled up to Jordan's school, morning light turning the brick building gold and pink. "Have a good day, buddy. Love you." Jordan leaned forward from his seat, kissed Marcus's cheek with the unself-conscious affection of a 6-year-old who hadn't yet learned embarrassment. "Love you too, Dad Hero. Are you going to the art center today?"
"Every day."
"Good. The kids need you." Jordan climbed out, joined the stream of children flowing toward the entrance, turned once to wave before disappearing through the doors. Marcus waited until he was completely out of sight, then pulled back into traffic. Riverside Community Arts Center occupied a converted warehouse in a neighborhood that was trying hard to gentrify, but hadn't quite managed the transition. The building was 3 stories of red brick and industrial windows, built in 1947 when the area was manufacturing hub and money flowed different. Now it housed art studios on the ground floor, dance spaces on the second, music rooms on the third, all of it operating on grants that never quite covered operating costs. Marcus had worked there for 9 years. He'd started as maintenance assistant the year he and Sarah got married, worked his way up to facilities supervisor by demonstrating the kind of competence that made problems disappear before administrators noticed they existed. He knew every pipe, every electrical panel, every weak point in the roof that needed watching during heavy rain. He knew which radiators would fail first when winter came, and which windows had to be propped because the latches had stripped years ago and budget never quite stretched to replacement. The parking lot was empty when he arrived at 7:15, 45 minutes before anyone else showed up. Marcus liked it that way, preferred working in silence before the building filled with voices and movement and the 1,000 small crises that defined his days. He unlocked the service entrance, disabled the alarm, walked through the ground floor checking that everything sat exactly as he'd left it yesterday evening. The flood damage from 3 months ago was finally mostly repaired. The drywall in Studio B still needed painting, and the floor in Studio C still felt slightly soft in one corner where water had soaked through and weakened the subflooring. But the immediate crisis had passed. Marcus had spent those 47 nights working alone because the center couldn't afford contractors, and the board was debating whether to close entirely or sell the building to developers who'd been circling with increasingly attractive offers. He'd fixed it anyway, not because he expected gratitude or recognition, but because children needed this place, and he knew how to keep it standing. His office was tucked in the basement next to the boiler room, a 10 by 12 space with concrete walls and fluorescent lighting that hummed constant and slightly off-pitch. The desk was surplus from a bank that closed in the 90s. The chair was donated by a board member who'd upgraded her home office. The filing cabinets were older than Marcus and built solid enough to survive another 50 years. He hung his jacket on the hook behind the door, sat down, opened the maintenance log to see what needed attention today. The phone on his desk rang at 8:30. Marcus recognized the extension. Diane Portman, the center's executive director, calling from her second-floor office. "Marcus, do you have a minute?" "Sure. Want me to come up?" "Please." Diane's office was everything Marcus's wasn't. Spacious, well-lit, decorated with children's artwork that rotated monthly to showcase the center's programs. Diane sat behind a desk that had been new within the last decade, her gray hair pulled back in a style that was professional without being severe, her expression carrying the particular exhaustion that came from managing nonprofit operations in an economic climate that viewed art as luxury rather than necessity. "Close the door." Marcus did, settled into the chair across from her desk, waited. Diane wasn't the type to waste time on small talk when something serious required discussion. "We're having donors visit next week. Foundation representatives doing their annual check-in." She picked up a pen, set it down, picked it up again in a gesture that telegraphed nervousness. "Victoria Brennan will be leading the tour." Marcus nodded, unsure why this required a closed-door conversation. Foundation visits happened twice a year, standard procedure for any organization receiving grant money. "I need you to make sure the building is perfect." Diane's eyes met his, held steady. "Not just functional, perfect. She's considering increased funding, but David Sutton has her ear, and he's been pushing hard to reallocate our grant to other projects." The name registered dim recognition. Marcus had seen David Sutton at board meetings, a man in his 50s who wore expensive suits and spoke in the language of quarterly returns and portfolio optimization. He'd been vocal about selling the building, about how the real estate value exceeded the social impact value, about how the foundation could do more good by liquidating this asset and distributing funds elsewhere. "I'll take care of it." "I know you will." Diane's expression softened slightly. "I also know you've been working 60-hour weeks without overtime. I can't pay you more right now, but I want you to know it's noticed." Marcus stood, headed for the door, stopped with his hand on the knob. "It's not about the money." "I know. But it should be." He spent the next 6 days making the building perfect. He repainted Studio B with primer and 2 coats of eggshell white. He replaced the bulbs in every overhead fixture, tested every outlet, tightened every loose doorknob and cabinet hinge. He cleaned the windows until light poured through unobstructed, mopped the floors until they shone, organized the supply closets with the precision of someone who understood that details revealed character. Friday afternoon, with the foundation visit scheduled for Monday morning, Marcus was replacing a cracked floor tile in the first-floor hallway when he heard footsteps approaching from the main entrance. He glanced up, expecting Diane or one of the instructors, and found himself looking at a woman he didn't recognize. She was maybe 40, white, dressed in a way that suggested money without advertising it. Dark slacks, cream blouse, leather bag that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month. Her hair was pulled back, simple and efficient. Her expression neutral in the way people practiced when they spent most of their time making decisions that affected strangers' lives. She walked past him without acknowledgement, moved down the hallway, examining the walls and doorways with the attention of someone conducting inventory. Marcus went back to his tilework, aware of her presence without watching directly, until her footsteps stopped and reversed. "You're working late." Marcus looked up. She was standing 3 feet away, studying him with the same attention she'd given the building.
Trying to finish before Monday. He wiped his hands on his work pants, started to stand, but she waved him back down.
Don't let me interrupt. I'm just looking around.
Are you with the foundation?
Something flickered across her face, too quick to read. Something like that. What are you fixing?
Cracked tile. Water damage from the flood 3 months ago.
Most of it's repaired now, but there's always details that need attention. She crouched down to his level, examined the work with genuine interest rather than polite performance. Her proximity made Marcus aware of how he must look. Work clothes stained with various substances from various projects, hair that needed cutting, the smell of adhesive and sweat that no amount of hand-washing quite eliminated. You did the flood repairs?
Most of them.
By yourself? The center can't afford contractors right now. She was quiet for a moment, still examining the tile work, then stood in a single fluid motion. It looks professional.
Thank you.
She walked away without introducing herself, disappeared through the main entrance, leaving Marcus alone with his tile work and the growing awareness that the casual encounter had been anything but casual.
He finished the installation, cleaned his tools, locked up the building at 8:30, and drove home to an apartment where Jordan was already asleep on the couch, Grace Mitchell reading a magazine in the chair beside him. Grace was 65 and had lived in the apartment next door for 30 years. She'd known Sarah, had attended the funeral, had shown up the day after with a casserole and an offer to watch Jordan whenever Marcus needed help. She refused payment, said she had time to spare, and enjoyed the company, became the grandmother Jordan would have had if Marcus's parents hadn't died before Jordan was born, and Sarah's family hadn't drifted away in the particular way that grief sometimes fractured connections. Long day? Every day. Marcus picked up Jordan carefully, carried him to the bedroom, tucked him in without waking him. When he returned to the living room, Grace had her coat on and her bag ready. He did homework, ate dinner, played for an hour, Asked about you around 7. What did you tell him?
that you were fixing things so other children could have nice spaces. He drew you a picture. It's on the refrigerator. Marcus walked her to the door, thanked her with words that felt inadequate for the gift she gave him daily. She patted his arm, told him to get some sleep, disappeared into her own apartment with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood that gratitude and debt were different currencies. The picture on the refrigerator showed a stick figure, Marcus surrounded by smaller stick figures, all of them smiling, hearts drawn in the margins in 6-year-old approximation of emotion. Marcus stood looking at it for longer than necessary, then made himself a sandwich he didn't taste, showered in water that ran lukewarm because the building's hot water heater was dying and the landlord kept promising replacement that never materialized, fell into bed at 10:30.
Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by the sound of his phone vibrating on the nightstand. Marcus grabbed it, squinted at the screen. 2:17 in the morning. Number he didn't recognize, area code that was local. He answered halfway between alert and dreaming. Marcus Reed? Speaking. This is Diane Portman. I know it's late, but I just got a call from the alarm company. The building's motion sensors are going off. Could be malfunction, could be break-in. Can you meet me there? Marcus was already standing, reaching for yesterday's pants draped over the chair. 15 minutes. He dressed in the dark, left a note for Grace in case Jordan woke up and panicked not finding him, drove through empty streets where traffic lights blinked yellow, and the only other cars belonged to people whose lives operated on night shift schedules. Riverside Community Arts Center sat dark, except for the security lights mounted at each corner, casting pools of illumination that didn't quite reach the building's center mass. Diane's car was already in the lot, Diane standing beside it with her phone pressed to her ear, ending a call as Marcus pulled in beside her. Together they approached the main entrance, and Marcus immediately saw the problem. The door was ajar. Lock mechanism intact, but door standing open 6 inches into darkness. Did you lock it when you left? Checked it twice. Marcus pulled his flashlight from his belt, pushed the door open wider, stepped inside with Diane close behind. The alarm panel showed disarmed status, which made no sense unless someone had the code or had bypassed the system entirely. They moved through the ground floor methodically, Marcus in front checking each room, while Diane stayed close enough to run if necessary, but far enough to give him space to work. The studios were empty, equipment undisturbed, supplies exactly where they belonged. The second floor showed the same story. Dance studios pristine, mirrors reflecting their flashlight beams back in stuttering brilliance. Nothing missing or moved. The third floor music rooms were empty too, instruments locked in their cases, chairs stacked neat against the walls. They were heading back downstairs when Marcus noticed something wrong with the light in the main hallway. The windows ran floor to ceiling along the eastern wall, and through them Chicago's downtown skyline glowed with the permanent twilight of a city that never went completely dark. But one section of that glow was blocked, interrupted by a shape that resolved into a person as Marcus's eyes adjusted. She was standing at the window looking out, backlit by the city's reflected light, and Marcus recognized her posture before his brain caught up with identification. The woman from Friday afternoon. The one who'd watched him work on the floor tile and asked questions that felt more significant than their content suggested. "We're closed." Marcus kept his voice level, non-threatening, the tone he'd learned working in spaces where confrontation escalated quickly without careful management. She turned, and the light caught her face enough to confirm what he'd already suspected. "I know. I'm sorry. The door was unlocked when I arrived, and I let myself in. I should have called first." Diane stepped forward, and her voice carried recognition Marcus hadn't heard before. "Miss Brennan?" "Diane, I apologize for the intrusion." Victoria Brennan moved away from the window, and in the combined glow of flashlights and city light, Marcus could see her expression clearly for the first time. Exhausted, haunted, carrying something heavy that had driven her here at 2:30 in the morning. "What are you doing here?" Diane's question came without accusation, just genuine confusion. "I couldn't sleep. I come here sometimes when insomnia gets bad. It helps to see the space when it's quiet, to remember why the work matters." She looked at Marcus directly. "You're the facility supervisor." Marcus Reed. "I know. I read your file this afternoon." The admission hung in the air with implications Marcus didn't have framework to process. Victoria Brennan was the foundation director, the person who controlled funding that kept this building operational, and she'd been reading his personnel file and breaking into the building at odd hours for reasons he couldn't begin to guess. The door lock failed, he heard himself say, falling back on the familiar territory of mechanical problems with mechanical solutions. "I'll replace it tomorrow." "Thank you." Victoria looked at Diane, then back to Marcus. "Could I speak with you for a moment? Privately?" Diane's expression suggested this was irregular, but not something she felt positioned to refuse. She nodded, headed back toward the stairs, left Marcus alone with a woman who'd been studying him for reasons that felt increasingly less random. Victoria walked to the nearest music room, gestured for Marcus to follow, closed the door behind them with a soft click that seemed too loud in the building's late-night quiet. The room smelled like wood polish and brass cleaner, instruments standing sentinel in their cases along the walls. "I watched you work for 3 hours last Friday." She didn't waste time on preamble or apology. "I came back Saturday and Sunday, and Monday morning I sat in my car for 45 minutes watching you unlock the building before anyone else arrived." Marcus said nothing, uncertain what response this confession required. "I've been reviewing this center's operations for 6 months, trying to decide whether to increase our funding or reallocate resources elsewhere. David Sutton makes a compelling argument for selling the building. The real estate value is significant, and the money could support 3 other programs." "I understand." "I don't think you do." She moved to the window, looked out at the same skyline she'd been studying when they'd found her. "I lost my husband 5 years ago. He killed himself after losing his job, after refusing help from anyone, including me, because he thought accepting assistance meant admitting failure. By the time he asked for help, it was too late." The words landed with a weight of truth that cost something to share. Marcus waited, letting silence create space for whatever she needed to say next. I've been looking for someone like him. Someone who works past exhaustion, who sacrifices without expectation of recognition, who would rather break than bend. She turned back to face Marcus. I found you, and I don't know what to do with that. I'm not your husband. No, but you're carrying the same weight alone. 47 nights of unpaid work, 60-hour weeks on a 40-hour salary, a 6-year-old son you're raising by yourself because your wife died and you decided survival was more important than living. Her voice was hard, but not cruel, scalpel rather than hammer. How long until you disappear too? Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach, familiar weight of being seen when he'd worked hard to remain invisible. I'm doing fine. You're doing what you have to do. That's different. Victoria crossed her arms, and the gesture made her look older than she probably was, exhaustion written in the set of her shoulders. I'm going to the board next week with a recommendation to increase this center's funding by 40%. David will fight me, but I'll win. That's not why I'm here tonight. Then why are you here? Because I needed to see if you were real. If there was actually someone who gave everything and asked for nothing, or if that was just a story I told myself to make sense of why my husband didn't reach for my hand. The honesty of it struck Marcus silent. He'd never thought of himself as anything other than a father doing necessary work, but through her eyes, he saw a different shape. Warning story, cautionary tale, proof that self-reliance taken to extreme became self-destruction. I'm sorry about your husband. Me too. She moved toward the door, paused with her hand on the knob. The center is safe. I'll make sure of it. But you should think about what comes after safety, because survival isn't the same as living, and your son deserves a father who understands the difference. She left, footsteps fading down the hallway and stairs, main door closing with solid finality. Marcus stood alone in the music room until Diane knocked soft and asked if everything was all right. He said it was, helped her reset the alarm and check the new lock he'd install tomorrow, drove home through streets where morning was starting to creep into sky at the edges. Jordan was still sleeping when Marcus crawled back into bed at 4:15. He lay there staring at the ceiling, Victoria's words circling in his head like birds that couldn't find place to land, until the alarm went off at 5:45, and the day began again. Word count, 5,247. Marcus received the gala invitation on a Tuesday afternoon that felt like every other Tuesday. Children's voices echoing from the studios above him, paint smell drifting down through old ventilation ducts, the specific creak of floorboards that meant someone was walking past the supply closet on the second floor. He was replacing outlet covers in the main hallway when Diane found him, envelope in hand, expression somewhere between amused and uncertain. This came for you. Foundation letterhead. Marcus set down his screwdriver, wiped his hands on his work pants, took the envelope. Heavyweight paper, his name printed in font that suggested someone had spent money on graphic design. He opened it carefully, aware of Diane watching. The invitation was formal. Riverside Community Arts Foundation Annual Gala, Saturday evening, cocktail reception at 6:30, dinner at 7, black tie requested. RSVP by Friday. And at the bottom, handwritten in blue ink, your presence would be appreciated. V.B. Are you going? Diane was trying not to smile. This has to be a mistake. I don't think Victoria Brennan makes mistakes with invitations. She approved the guest list personally. Diane's expression shifted to something more serious. You should go. It's a networking opportunity, and it wouldn't hurt for donors to see the person who keeps this building standing. Marcus looked at the invitation again at his name printed there like he belonged in spaces where people wore tuxedos and made small talk about charitable giving. The idea felt absurd and vaguely threatening, exposure without armor. I don't own a tuxedo. Rent one, or borrow one. Marcus, this is a good thing. Let it be a good thing. He told Jordan about it that night over dinner, watching his son's face light up with excitement that felt disproportionate to the actual event. You're going to a party? Like a fancy party with dancing? I don't think there's dancing, just dinner and talking. You should wear your blue tie, the one Mom liked. Sarah had bought him that tie for their 5th anniversary, said the color matched his eyes, even though Marcus's eyes were brown and the tie was definitely blue. He'd worn it to her funeral and hadn't touched it since, but Jordan's suggestion carried weight that had nothing to do with fashion. I'll think about it. Wednesday he mentioned it to Grace when she came to watch Jordan while Marcus worked late fixing a boiler that chose 4 o'clock to start making concerning noises. She listened, nodded, and delivered the same message Diane had with different words. Sarah would want you to go. She always said you worked too hard to stay invisible. I'm not trying to stay invisible. I'm trying to do my job. Sometimes those are the same thing. Grace settled into her chair, picked up the book she'd been reading to Jordan. And sometimes they're not. You should figure out which one you're doing. Thursday. Marcus stopped at a thrift store on his way home from work, found a suit that almost fit for $35, black shoes for $12 that would pass inspection in low light. The jacket was too big in the shoulders and too tight across the back, but it was clean and whole, better than anything else in his closet. Friday after work, he tried everything on while Jordan sat on the bed, offering commentary. You look fancy, Dad Hero, like you're going to save the day in that suit. I'm just going to dinner. But you'll be the most important person there, right? Because you fix things for kids. Marcus looked at his son, at the gap-toothed smile and the absolute conviction in those words, and felt something crack in the wall he'd built around the idea of this event mattering. Jordan believed his father was important. Jordan drew pictures of Dad Hero and thought a borrowed suit meant saving the day. Maybe that was enough reason to show up. Saturday arrived cloudy and cold, November wind cutting through Chicago streets with the promise of early snow. Marcus spent the morning with Jordan, took him to the park even though the temperature barely crept above 40, pushed him on swings until Jordan's cheeks were pink and his laughter was the only sound that mattered. Grace came at 5 to watch Jordan for the evening. She'd insisted she didn't need payment, that watching one small boy have dinner and go to bed was hardly work, but Marcus had left $40 on the counter anyway because accepting kindness didn't mean taking advantage. Jordan helped him get ready, brought him the blue tie without being asked, watched with solemn attention as Marcus struggled with the knot until muscle memory from weddings and funerals kicked in, and his hands remembered the pattern. The final result was passable, if not polished. A man trying hard to look like he belonged somewhere he'd never been. You're the handsomest dad ever. You're biased. What's biased mean? It means you love me, so you think I look good even when I don't. Jordan considered this seriously. Mom used to say you looked good all the time. Was she biased too? Marcus knelt down so they were eye level, adjusted Jordan's collar even though it didn't need adjusting. Yeah, buddy, she was. But I loved that she was. The drive downtown took 40 minutes through traffic that was lighter than weekdays, but still substantial. Marcus parked 3 blocks from the venue because the valet parking looked too expensive and too exposing. Walked through streets where other people in formal wear moved with the confidence of those accustomed to events like this. The building was all glass and steel and modern angles, lit from within like a jewelry box. Doormen in uniform holding doors that probably cost more than Marcus's car. He joined the flow of arrivals, handed his invitation to someone checking names against a list, accepted a program and a drink he didn't want from a server who moved past before he could say thank you. The main hall was 3 stories tall, with a glass ceiling showing sky that was darkening toward evening, chandeliers hanging at intervals that suggested someone had calculated optimal lighting impact. People clustered in groups of 5 and 6, conversation flowing easy as water, everyone knowing everyone in the way that came from occupying the same social strata. Marcus recognized no one, felt the weight of not belonging settle heavy across his shoulders. He found a spot near the back where a column provided partial shelter, sipped his drink because holding it gave his hands purpose, and tried not to calculate how quickly he could leave without offending whoever had decided he should be here. "Marcus Reed?" He turned to find a man approaching, 50s, expensive suit that fit the way clothes fit when they're custom made, smile that didn't reach his eyes. Marcus recognized him from board meetings. David Sutton. "Mr. Sutton." "Call me David. I'm surprised to see you here. Victoria doesn't usually invite staff to donor events." The word staff carried weight beyond its syllable count, marking territory and hierarchy in a single breath. Marcus felt his spine straighten involuntarily. "She thought my presence would be valuable." "I'm sure she did." David's smile adjusted slightly, becoming something that resembled friendliness without actually being friendly. "The work you did on the flood damage was impressive." "Very impressive for someone without formal contractor training. I learned on the job. Best way to learn, I suppose. Though I imagine there's a ceiling to that kind of education. Victoria mentioned she's considering increased funding for the center. I've advised her that selling the property might better serve the foundation's overall mission, but she seems attached to keeping it operational." David took a sip of his drink, studied Marcus over the rim. "Do you think the center serves the community well in its current form?" The question was a trap. Marcus could feel it, but couldn't identify the mechanism. "I think it provides services families can't get elsewhere. Services that could be replicated in 3 other facilities if we liquidated the real estate asset? It's just business logic, nothing personal." Marcus had heard this argument before, knew the shape of it, knew that nothing personal was always deeply personal to someone. The families who use that building can't relocate to 3 other facilities. They live in that neighborhood. They need that space. Need is such a loaded word. David finished his drink, set it on a passing server's tray with practiced ease. "Well, enjoy the evening. It's always good to see the foundation's impact embodied in real people." He walked away, leaving Marcus alone with the distinct impression that he'd been examined and found categorically lacking in ways he didn't fully understand. The gala moved from cocktail hour to dinner with the gentle herding of professional event management. Marcus found his seat at a table near the back, grateful for placement that suggested he was included without being showcased. His table mates were couples in their 50s and 60s, conversation revolving around vacation homes and stock portfolios, and children attending universities Marcus recognized from news articles about tuition rates that exceeded his annual salary. They were polite to him in the way people are polite to strangers at weddings, asking basic questions and moving on when his answers revealed he didn't share their reference points. He ate food he couldn't taste, listened to speeches about charitable impact and strategic philanthropy, and thought about Jordan at home with Grace, probably asleep by now, with Sarah's blanket tucked under his chin. The auction started after dessert, items displayed on screens mounted throughout the hall, while an auctioneer worked the room with practiced enthusiasm. A painting went for $30,000, a week in Tuscany for $45,000. Jewelry, wine collections, premium tickets to sold-out events, each lot climbing to numbers that made Marcus's monthly rent look like pocket change. He was checking his watch, calculating how soon he could leave without being obviously rude, when Victoria Brennan took the stage and the energy in the room shifted. She wore a dress the color of deep water, hair down for the first time since Marcus had met her, and when she spoke, the room fell silent with the attention given to people whose words carried weight beyond their content. "Tonight's final item isn't listed in your program. It's not art or travel or luxury goods. It's something more important than any of that." She paused, let the words settle. "It's recognition." Marcus felt his stomach drop, instinct screaming warning before his conscious mind understood what was happening. 6 months ago, Our foundation received a report about flood damage at Riverside Community Arts Center. The estimated repair cost was $300,000. The board discussed closing the facility permanently, selling the building, reallocating resources. Then something unexpected happened. Victoria's eyes swept the room, landed on Marcus for a half second before moving on. One person decided that wasn't acceptable. One person stayed for 47 consecutive nights, worked without overtime pay, made repairs that saved the building and kept it open for the 400 children and families who depend on its services. Marcus stopped breathing. Around him, people were turning, looking, trying to identify who she was describing. His hands gripped the edge of the table hard enough to hurt. "Marcus Reed, would you please stand?" The request landed like a physical blow. Every eye in the room pivoted toward him, hundreds of strangers watching as he remained frozen, unable to move, unable to process what was happening. Victoria's expression was gentle but unyielding, waiting with the patience of someone who understood the cost of visibility but believed it was necessary anyway. Marcus stood because refusing would create greater spectacle than complying, and the room erupted in applause that felt like knives against his skin. Marcus works as facility supervisor on a salary that barely covers living expenses. He raises his 6-year-old son alone after losing his wife 3 years ago. He gives everything to his work and asks for nothing in return. Victoria's voice carried emotion now, something raw beneath the professional delivery. "Tonight, I'm asking this room to recognize that giving everything shouldn't mean having nothing. I'm proposing a structured trust to support Marcus and his son, education funding, reliable childcare, housing stability, not charity, but investment in a person who embodies the values we claim to support." The applause had stopped, replaced by murmurs, whispers, people processing what they were witnessing. Marcus felt his face burning, humiliation and something else he couldn't name rising in his throat. "The bidding starts at $50,000. Paddles rose, numbers climbed. 80,000, 100,000. Marcus watched it happen from somewhere outside himself, detached and horrified, as strangers placed monetary value on his struggle, like he was commodity being traded. David Sutton's paddle went up. 150,000. Marcus's eyes found him in the crowd, saw the smile that suggested this was power play rather than generosity. The number climbed higher. 160. 165. Sold for $165,000. The applause returned, thunderous and inescapable. Victoria was walking toward him, expression carefully neutral, and Marcus understood with sudden clarity that she'd orchestrated this, that the invitation and the speeches and the attention were all planned to force him into accepting help he'd never asked for and didn't know how to refuse. She reached his table, spoke quiet enough that only he could hear. "Breathe. It's almost over. I didn't agree to this. I know. But I couldn't watch you disappear into silence. Your son needs you to stay visible." The words struck something deep, bypassing anger to hit the fear beneath it. That Jordan was watching. That Jordan needed a father who survived. That maybe Victoria was right about the difference between endurance and living. But that didn't make this easier. Didn't erase the shame of having his private struggles transformed into public theater. Victoria led him to a side room off the main hall where the noise faded to muffled sound through heavy doors. She closed them carefully, turned to face him with an expression that held no triumph, only exhausted relief. "I need you to understand something. This isn't charity. It's a structured trust designed to remove pressure without removing agency. Education fund for Jordan, child care expenses, help with housing stability. You maintain complete control over your life. You keep your job. Nothing changes except the weight you're carrying alone." "Everything changes." Marcus heard his voice shake. "I just became the facility supervisor who needed rich people to rescue him. Every parent at that center will wonder if I'm competent or just someone they pity. Or they'll see you as someone who worked past exhaustion and deserved recognition. Victoria's expression softened. I know this is hard, but I've learned that pride kills quietly, and I won't watch it happen again. Marcus wanted to argue, wanted to refuse, wanted to walk out of this building and pretend the last hour hadn't happened. But he thought about Jordan asking if the lady with sad eyes was staying, thought about how he taught his son to accept help from Grace because kindness deserved trust, thought about Sarah's voice saying that accepting assistance wasn't weakness when it meant being present for the people who mattered. I need time to think. Of course, the trust paperwork can wait. But Marcus? She waited until he met her eyes. Your son is watching. Make sure you're teaching him what you actually believe about accepting help when it's offered with respect. She left him alone in the quiet room, and Marcus sank into the nearest chair, head in his hands, everything inside him pulling in different directions. Through the door, he could hear the party continuing, music and laughter from people who'd already forgotten his name, and he wondered how he'd become the kind of story they'd tell over breakfast tomorrow, the sad one with the dead wife who needed saving. He stayed there for 20 minutes, then left through a side exit that avoided the main hall, walked 3 blocks to his car through cold that felt appropriate for the numbness spreading through his chest. The drive home took an hour because he took wrong turns twice, mind somewhere else entirely, and when he finally pulled into his apartment building's lot, it was past 11, and the windows of his unit were dark. Grace opened the door at his knock, took one look at his face, and asked no questions. He's asleep. Was good as gold all evening. Made me a drawing to take home. Marcus thanked her, locked the door behind her, moved through the apartment, checking on Jordan like he did every night. His son was curled around Sarah's blanket, breathing steady and peaceful, and Marcus stood watching until the tightness in his chest eased slightly. The drawing Grace had mentioned was on the refrigerator, held by magnets Jordan had made in art class. Marcus in a suit, surrounded by hearts and stars. The words, "Dad Hero Saves the Day," printed carefully along the bottom in Jordan's improving handwriting. Marcus pulled it down, studied it in the kitchen's fluorescent light, and something inside him cracked. Not broke, but cracked, letting through something he'd kept buried for 3 years because survival required shutting down everything that wasn't essential. He sat at the kitchen table, put his head in his hands, and let himself cry for the first time since Sarah's funeral. Not because of the money or the attention or the humiliation, but because Jordan believed his father was a hero, and Marcus was terrified of being anything less than what that belief required. Sunday morning brought weak sunlight through Marcus's apartment windows and the sound of Jordan singing off-key in the bathroom while brushing his teeth. Marcus lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying last night frame by frame, searching for the moment when he could have said no and walked away before everything shifted. The replay offered no answers, just the same sequence ending with him alone at the kitchen table while his son slept and the world rearranged itself around choices he hadn't made. Jordan appeared in the doorway, still wearing his Spider-Man pajamas, toothpaste foam at the corner of his mouth. "Can we have pancakes?" Marcus pushed himself upright, feet finding the cold floor. "Yeah, buddy. Go wash your face." The kitchen routine felt like armor against chaos. Bowl from the cabinet, ingredients measured by muscle memory, griddle heating while Jordan climbed into his chair and pulled Sarah's blanket across his lap. Marcus was pouring the first circle of batter when someone knocked on the apartment door with a kind of confidence that suggested they knew they'd be welcomed. Jordan scrambled down from his chair. "I'll get it." "Check the peephole first." Marcus flipped the pancake, heard Jordan's excited voice from the entryway. "It's the quiet lady from Dad's story." Every muscle in Marcus's body tensed. He turned off the griddle, moved toward the door where Jordan had already unlocked the deadbolt, and was pulling it open to reveal Victoria Brennan standing in the hallway, holding a leather portfolio
and wearing jeans and a sweater that made her look less like a CEO and more like someone who'd chosen casual Sunday morning over professional distance. I should have called first. Her eyes met his, held steady despite the apology. But I thought this conversation needed to happen away from the foundation office. Jordan was staring at her with the unfiltered curiosity of 6-year-olds who hadn't learned that prolonged eye contact made adults uncomfortable. You're prettier when you're not sad. Dad said you were sad at the party. Victoria's expression flickered, something unguarded crossing her face before she controlled it. Your dad said that? He said you looked like you needed a friend. Are you Dad's friend? Marcus stepped forward, put his hand on Jordan's shoulder.
Why don't you go set the table? Miss Brennan might stay for breakfast if we ask nicely.
Jordan disappeared toward the kitchen with a kind of enthusiasm that suggested hosting breakfast guests ranked among life's great adventures. Victoria remained in the hallway, portfolio clutched against her chest like a shield. I really should have called. You're here now. Come in. She entered carefully, taking in the apartment with the attention of someone trained to assess spaces. The worn furniture that came with a lease, the refrigerator covered in Jordan's drawings, the bookshelf holding paperbacks Sarah had collected and Marcus couldn't bring himself to donate. Her gaze lingered on the mantel where Sarah's photo sat in a simple frame, then moved away with the courtesy of someone who understood that grief lived in the small things. Jordan had set 3 places at the table, put out the syrup and butter, and was now arranging paper napkins with geometric precision.
Do you like pancakes? Dad makes them from Mom's special recipe. They're the best pancakes in the whole world.
Victoria settled into the chair Jordan indicated, set her portfolio on the floor beside her. I'm sure they are. Marcus returned to the griddle, poured 3 more circles, focused on the familiar task while hyper-aware of Victoria's presence in his home. This space had been private territory since Sarah died, visited only by Grace and occasionally by Jordan's school friends whose parents dropped them off and picked them up without coming inside. Having Victoria here felt like violation of some unspoken boundary, exposure of the domestic reality he'd worked to keep separate from everything else. Jordan filled the silence with a running commentary about school, about the butterfly unit starting Monday, about how his friend Tyler had lost another tooth and the tooth fairy brought $2, which seemed like a lot.
Victoria listened with attention that appeared genuine rather than performed, asking follow-up questions that proved she was actually tracking the conversation, instead of just waiting for Jordan to stop talking. Marcus brought the pancakes to the table, set plates in front of Jordan and Victoria, took his own seat. Jordan attacked his food with single-minded focus, while Victoria cut hers into precise squares, eating with the careful attention of someone who'd learned to notice everything. These are really good. Mom taught Dad how to make them. Jordan spoke through a mouthful, remembered his manners, swallowed before continuing. She used to make them every Sunday. Now Dad makes them, so we remember her. Victoria set down her fork, something shifting in her expression. That's a beautiful way to remember someone. Do you remember people with food? The question landed with the casual directness that made adult conversations with children feel like navigating minefields. Victoria was quiet for a moment, considering whether to deflect or engage, and Marcus saw her choose honesty. I remember my husband with music. He played piano, and certain songs make me think of him sitting at the keys in our living room. Did he go to heaven too? Yes, 5 years ago. Jordan nodded, processing this information with the seriousness of someone who'd learned early that death wasn't abstract concept, but concrete reality. It's okay to be sad about it. Dad's sad about Mom sometimes, but he says it's good to remember because that keeps them alive in our hearts. Marcus felt something catch in his throat, hearing his own words reflected back through his son's understanding. Victoria's eyes were bright with moisture she was too controlled to let become actual tears. Your dad is very wise. He's the best dad in the world. Are you here to give him a prize for being good at his job? The question shifted the energy in the room back toward the reality of why Victoria was sitting at their table on Sunday morning. She glanced at Marcus, asking silent permission to explain. He gave the smallest nod. "I'm here to talk to your dad about some ways the foundation can help make your lives a little easier. Things like help with school costs and making sure he has good childcare when he's working." Jordan's face lit up. "Like having Miss Grace all the time instead of just sometimes?" "Exactly like that. That would be good. Dad worries a lot about leaving me alone." Marcus stood abruptly, started clearing plates to give his hands something to do besides clench. "Jordan, why don't you go get dressed? We'll go to the park after Ms. Brennan and I talk." Jordan slid down from his chair, carried his plate to the sink with exaggerated care, then disappeared into his bedroom. Marcus waited until he heard the door close before turning to face Victoria. "You brought the contracts." She bent to retrieve the portfolio, pulled out a folder thick with documents. "The trust structure is straightforward. $165,000 distributed over 24 months. Education fund for Jordan with automatic deposits into a 529 account. Child care expenses covered up to $1,500 per month. Housing stipend to help with rent or move to a more stable situation if you choose. And funding for you to complete your construction management certification." Marcus took the documents, flipped through pages dense with legal language that would require careful reading he wasn't prepared to do with her watching. "What's the catch?" "No catch. No public performance required. No oversight beyond quarterly check-ins to ensure the funds are being used as intended. You maintain complete autonomy over your life and decisions." Someone bid $165,000 on the idea of helping me. That creates obligation whether you put it in writing or not. Victoria leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms in a gesture that looked more like self-protection than defensiveness. "The donor wishes to remain anonymous. Their only requirement was that the support be structured to remove pressure without removing dignity." Marcus set the folder on the table, the weight of it seeming disproportionate to its actual mass. "I need time to think about this." "Of course. There's no deadline. But Marcus?" She waited until he looked at her directly. "Your son just told me you worry about leaving him alone. That weight you're carrying isn't invisible, and it's not noble. It's just heavy. Let someone help lift it." She stood, gathered her portfolio, moved toward the door with the efficiency of someone who'd said what needed saying and understood that lingering would only make retreat harder. Jordan emerged from his bedroom wearing mismatched socks and a shirt inside out, oblivious to fashion crimes but aware enough to sense the conversation had ended. "Are you staying for the park?" "Not today, but thank you for breakfast. Those really were the best pancakes." Jordan beamed, and Victoria's smile in response looked genuine enough that Marcus almost believed she'd come here just for the food and company, rather than to deliver documents that would reshape his entire life if he let them. After she left, Marcus and Jordan went to the park as promised, but Marcus's mind stayed behind in the apartment with those contracts sitting on the kitchen table like unexploded ordnance. Jordan played on the swings and slides while Marcus sat on a bench trying to identify what felt wrong about accepting help that came with no apparent strings, and the answer kept circling back to the same place. He didn't know how to teach Jordan about self-reliance while demonstrating dependence on strangers' charity. Monday morning, Marcus arrived at Riverside Community Arts Center to find Diane waiting in his office, her expression carrying the specific tension that preceded difficult conversations. "We need to talk about the media situation." Marcus set down his coffee, braced for whatever came next. "What media situation?" "Channel 7 ran a story last night about the gala. Local foundation helps struggling father. They used your name. And there's an article in the Tribune this morning with basically the same angle." She handed him her phone, showing a headline that made his stomach drop. "Arts Center worker gets $165,000 after public appeal." The article included a photo from the gala, Marcus standing while the room watched, Victoria at the podium.
The text described his situation in broad strokes that felt simultaneously accurate and reductive. Single father, dead wife, heroic flood repairs, generous donors stepping in to help. The comment section was already active, with opinions ranging from supportive to skeptical to outright hostile. Why do some people get handouts while the rest of us struggle? This is beautiful. Faith in humanity restored. Seems like poverty porn to me. Rich people need to feel good about themselves. Marcus handed the phone back, feeling something cold settle in his chest. How bad is it going to get? I don't know, but parents are asking questions, some supportive, some wondering if this affects your position here, if there's conflict of interest with foundation funding. Diane's expression softened. I'm not questioning your competence, but we need to have a plan for how to address this.
What kind of plan? Statement to parents explaining that this doesn't change your role or responsibilities. Maybe some distance from high-profile foundation activities until things settle. And Marcus, you might want to think about whether accepting this money is worth the scrutiny it's bringing. He spent the rest of the day hyper-aware of every interaction, reading meaning into casual greetings and coffee break silences. Some coworkers were genuinely supportive, stopping by to congratulate him or share their own stories of struggling to make ends meet. Others were awkward in ways that suggested discomfort with his newfound visibility, keeping conversations brief and professional where they'd once been friendly. The parents were worse. Marcus overheard two mothers talking in the hallway outside Studio B, voices low, but not quite low enough. I just think it's inappropriate. He's staff. The foundation funds this place. How is that not conflict of interest? He fixed the building when it was going to close. That seems like he earned something. Or he made himself indispensable so they'd feel obligated. I'm not saying he's a bad person, just that the optics are problematic. Marcus continued past without acknowledging he'd heard, but the words followed him through the rest of the day like stray dogs looking for scraps. Tuesday morning, Jordan came home from school quiet in a way that set off alarms. Marcus waited until after dinner to press. Something happened at school? Jordan pushed his green beans around his plate, not eating, not looking up. Tyler's mom said you got money because you're poor and people felt sorry for us. The words landed with the precision of surgical strikes, cutting through every rationalization Marcus had constructed about how this wouldn't affect his son. What did you say? I said you're not poor. You're a hero. But then Tyler said heroes don't need help from rich people.
Jordan's voice cracked slightly.
Are we poor, Dad?
Marcus set down his fork, gathered his thoughts with the care of someone diffusing explosives.
We have everything we need. Food, home, clothes. We're not rich, but we're not poor either. We're exactly where lots of families are, working hard and making it work. Then why did those people give you money? Because they think the work I do matters and wanted to help make things easier for us. That doesn't mean we needed saving. It means someone noticed what I was already doing and wanted to support it.
Jordan considered this, then asked the question Marcus had been dreading.
Did I do something wrong? Is that why everything feels different?
Marcus pulled his son into his lap, held him close enough to feel the small heartbeat against his chest.
No, you didn't do anything wrong. Adults made this complicated, and I'm trying to figure out how to make it simple again. That night, after Jordan was asleep, Marcus pulled the contract documents from where he'd left them on top of the refrigerator and read through every page with the attention of someone looking for escape clauses. The language was exactly as Victoria described, straightforward funding with minimal oversight, designed to provide support without creating dependence. But the media coverage had added a dimension she hadn't accounted for, transforming private assistance into public spectacle with consequences that rippled outward into every interaction. By Thursday morning, Marcus had made his decision. He sat at the kitchen table before Jordan woke, drafting a letter on notebook paper because formal documents required formal rejection. Dear Ms. Brennan, I appreciate the generous gesture made at last Saturday's gala. and I understand it comes from a place of genuine concern. However, I cannot accept the trust fund as structured.
The media attention has created complications that affect not just me, but my son, and I will not teach him that accepting help is worth the cost of becoming someone's charity project. I'm grateful for the Foundation's support of Riverside Community Arts Center and hope this decision doesn't affect that relationship. Respectfully, Marcus Reed. He folded the letter into an envelope, addressed it to Victoria at the Foundation office, left it on the counter where he'd see it, and remembered to mail it on his way to work. Jordan emerged from his bedroom, dragging Sarah's blanket, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Is today pancake day?"
Tuesday was pancake day. Today is cereal day.
Jordan accepted this without complaint, settled at the table while Marcus poured Cheerios into a bowl and added milk. They ate in silence, broken only by the crunch of cereal and the occasional question about whether Marcus remembered to sign the permission slip for Friday's field trip.
Marcus dropped Jordan at school, drove to work, parked in his usual spot, and sat in the car staring at the art center's brick facade while trying to convince himself that refusing the money was the right choice for the right reasons and not just pride masquerading as principle. He made it until 2 in the afternoon before Victoria appeared at his office door without warning or announcement, holding the letter he'd written. "We need to talk. Not here. Your apartment. Tonight after Jordan's asleep." Marcus wanted to argue, to insist this conversation could happen in his office or not at all, but something in her expression suggested arguing would only delay the inevitable. "Fine. 9 o'clock. She left, and Marcus spent the rest of the workday moving through tasks on automatic while his mind ran scenarios of how the evening's conversation would unfold. None of them ended well. Grace arrived at 8:30 to watch Jordan, asked no questions when Marcus explained he had a meeting, settled into her chair with the thriller novel she'd been reading for the past week. Jordan was already in his pajamas, working on a drawing at the kitchen table, and barely looked up when Marcus said he'd be back in a couple hours. Victoria arrived at 9 exactly, knocked soft enough that Jordan wouldn't hear from his bedroom, waited in the hallway until Marcus opened the door and stepped back to let her enter. She moved past him into the living room, turned to face him with the letter still clutched in her hand. "This is a mistake. That's not your decision to make. You're right. It's yours. But you're making it for the wrong reasons." She set the letter on the coffee table, a physical barrier between them. "The media coverage will fade. People will move on to the next story. What won't fade is the impact of you teaching your son that accepting help means admitting defeat." Marcus felt anger rise, hot and immediate. "Don't tell me what I'm teaching my son. You don't know him. You don't know what he needs. I know what I needed when my husband killed himself because he was too proud to ask for help after he lost his job. I know what it feels like to watch someone disappear into shame when support was right there waiting." Her voice cracked, composure fracturing for the first time since he'd met her. "He refused help from everyone, including me, because he thought it meant admitting he'd failed. By the time he was ready to ask, the shame had eaten through everything that made him want to keep living." The confession landed like a physical blow, stripping away the professional distance Victoria had maintained and revealing the raw wound beneath. Marcus's anger drained as quickly as it had risen, replaced by something more complicated. "I'm sorry, but I'm not your husband. No. You're the man who works 60 hours a week and pretends it's sustainable, who fixes other people's problems while ignoring his own deteriorating situation, who would rather break quietly than accept support loudly." She moved closer, and Marcus could see exhaustion written in every line of her face. "I won't watch another good man disappear because pride matters more than survival. I can't. This isn't about pride. It's about teaching Jordan to work for what he gets. He's 6. What he needs is a father who's present, not a father who's too exhausted to be anything but functional." Victoria's expression shifted to something gentler. "I lost my husband 5 years ago. Cancer took him after the suicide attempt failed and left him with brain damage that made the next 3 years worse than dying would have been. I got to say goodbye, but those goodbyes were to someone who wasn't really there anymore. Do you know what I would have given to have him accept help when it mattered? To have 3 more years of him actually present instead of 3 years watching him disappear? Marcus sank onto the couch, sudden exhaustion making standing feel like too much effort. Victoria remained standing, arms crossed, looking down at him with an expression that held no judgment, just weary recognition of someone who'd already lost the battle Marcus was fighting. Sarah used to tell me that accepting help was trust, not weakness. The words came out before Marcus could stop them, admission he hadn't planned to make. She'd get upset when I wouldn't let her family help with bills, or when I'd refuse to take sick days even when I was actually sick. Last argument we had before she died was about me working a double shift when I was running a fever. She said I was teaching Jordan that suffering alone was noble instead of stupid. She was right. Maybe, but she's not here to see me prove her right or wrong. Marcus looked up, met Victoria's eyes. I can't accept this money knowing everyone's talking about me like I'm broken and needed rescuing. Jordan heard a kid's mother say we're poor and people feel sorry for us. How do I look him in the eye and tell him that's not true while accepting money that proves it is? Victoria finally sat, choosing the chair across from him rather than the couch beside him, maintaining physical distance that acknowledged the emotional proximity of the conversation. You tell him that needing support and being broken are different things. That accepting help when it's offered with respect doesn't erase the work you've already done. That letting someone walk beside you isn't the same as being carried. And when he asks why we need help if we're not broken, you tell him the truth. That everyone needs help sometimes, and the brave thing is saying yes when it's hard. She leaned forward, elbows on knees. Marcus, I'm not trying to rescue you. I'm trying to prevent the outcome I couldn't prevent with my husband. Maybe that's selfish. Maybe I'm projecting my guilt onto your situation. But I've learned that pride kills quietly, and I won't watch it happen again if I can help it. The apartment was quiet except for the ambient sounds of the building settling and distant traffic through walls that did an imperfect job of insulation. Marcus thought about Jordan asking if he'd done something wrong, about parents whispering in hallways, about the way his co-workers had shifted from friendly to careful. He thought about Sarah telling him to let people in, about working until exhaustion became baseline, about the gap between surviving and actually living. If I accept this, it has to be on different terms. Victoria straightened slightly, attention sharpening. What terms? Not a trust fund. A job. Real work with real deliverables. You said the foundation wants to expand community programs. Hire me as a consultant. Let me design initiatives based on what I actually know from living this. Pay me a fair salary for fair work, not charity dressed up as support. She was quiet for a long moment, considering the proposal from angles he couldn't see. That changes the structure completely. The trust fund was designed to be unconditional. I don't want unconditional. Jordan needs to see me work for what I receive. If I'm helping design programs that serve families like mine, that's honest labor. I can accept payment for labor without feeling like I'm teaching my son to take handouts. What about the education fund? The child care support? Roll it into the compensation. 2-year contract, salary that reflects the value of the work, plus the support needs you identified. But I earn it. Every dollar. Victoria stood, moved to the window overlooking the parking lot, her reflection visible in the glass. The board will need to approve the restructure. David Sutton will fight it because he fights everything that doesn't align with his efficiency metrics. But I think I can make it work. Then I'll accept, on those terms, as employment, not charity. She turned from the window, and something in her expression had shifted to relief mixed with respect. You're allowed to make this harder than it needs to be, you know. The money was there regardless of structure. Structure matters. It's the difference between dependence and partnership. Marcus stood, moved toward the door in a gesture that suggested the conversation had reached its natural end. Thank you for understanding that. Victoria collected the letter from the coffee table, folded it once, and slipped it into her jacket pocket. I'll have revised contracts drawn up by end of week. Consultant position, 2-year term. Compensation structured to include support services. Fair? Fair. She paused at the door, hand on the knob, looking back at him with an expression that was difficult to read. For what it's worth, I think Sarah would be proud of you for saying yes, even if you needed to rebuild the ask to feel okay about accepting it. After she left, Marcus stood in the living room feeling lighter than he had since Saturday night, not because the problem was solved, but because he'd found a way to solve it that didn't require abandoning the principles he was trying to teach his son. Grace emerged from the kitchen where she'd been giving them privacy, her expression knowing. She's good people. Yeah, I think she is. Sarah would have liked her. Marcus thought about that, about whether it was true or just comforting fiction, and decided it didn't matter. What mattered was that he'd found a way forward that honored both his need for dignity and Jordan's need for stability. And maybe that was enough. The week passed with the surreal quality of waiting for outcomes outside his control. Victoria called Thursday to confirm the board had approved the restructured contract despite David Sutton's objections. Diane seemed relieved when Marcus explained the new arrangement, said it would be easier to present to questioning parents as legitimate employment rather than charity case. The media attention faded as predicted, replaced by other stories about other people whose lives were briefly interesting to strangers. Jordan came home from school Friday with a black eye and a note from the principal requesting Marcus's presence Monday morning. Marcus's stomach dropped at the sight of his son's swollen face, bruises spreading purple across the cheekbone. What happened? Jordan set down his backpack, didn't meet Marcus's eyes. Tyler said his mom said you're teaching me to be a beggar. I said you're not a beggar, you're a consultant. He said that's just a fancy word for beggar, so I hit him. Marcus felt equal parts anger at Tyler's mother and dismay at his son's solution. Violence isn't how we solve problems. But he was lying about you. Jordan's voice carried the righteous indignation of someone defending a loved one. I couldn't let him lie. Come here. Jordan approached reluctantly, and Marcus pulled him close despite the tension in his son's small frame. I appreciate you defending me, but hitting people doesn't change their minds, it just makes them angry. You got suspended for 3 days. That means you can't go to school, and I can't go to work because I need to watch you. I'm sorry. I know. But sorry doesn't fix the consequences. Marcus held him at arm's length, making sure Jordan was looking at him directly. Did I do something to make you think I needed defending? Jordan's expression crumpled, tears starting despite obvious effort to hold them back. Everything changed and I didn't understand why. First the party, then the money, then people talking. And I thought maybe I did something wrong that made you need help. And Tyler's mom said, what Tyler's mom said doesn't matter. What matters is that you and I are okay. We're always going to be okay as long as we're honest with each other. Marcus wiped tears from Jordan's cheeks with his thumb. I'm accepting a job with the foundation. Real work, designing programs to help families. It's not charity, it's employment. And it means I'll be home more evenings and we'll have money to do things like replace those shoes you've been wearing that are too small. Jordan sniffled, processing this information. So you're not a beggar? Never was, never will be. Just a dad trying to give you the best life possible while teaching you that asking for help when you need it isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Mom used to say that. Your mom was a smart woman. Monday morning, Marcus met with the principal, accepted Jordan's 3-day suspension without argument,
took his son to the park afterward because staying in the apartment felt like punishment for both of them. They sat on a bench watching other children play, Jordan subdued in a way that wasn't natural for him. "I wish Mom was here." Marcus felt the words pierce something in his chest. "Me too, buddy. Every day." "Would she think I was bad for hitting Tyler?" "She'd think you were protective and impulsive. She'd probably give you the same talk about using words instead of fists that I gave you. But she'd also understand why you did it." Marcus pulled Jordan closer. "You know what she used to tell me when I was struggling with accepting help from her family?" "What?" "She said that letting people in wasn't admitting defeat. It was building community. And community was what kept people strong when life got hard." Jordan leaned against him, small and warm and trusting in ways that made Marcus's chest ache. "Are we building community now?" "Yeah, I think we are." Wednesday afternoon, while Jordan was serving his suspension by reading books in Marcus's office at the Arts Center, Diane appeared at the door with an expression that telegraphed crisis. "Emergency board meeting called for Friday. David Sutton is pushing a vote to sell the building to Lakeside Development. Says the real estate value is too significant to ignore, and the foundation can better serve the community by liquidating the asset." Marcus felt cold spread through his chest. "Can he do that?" "If he gets enough board votes, yes. Victoria is fighting it, but she's advisor, not voting member. She needs community support to counter his financial arguments." Diane's hands twisted together, nervous energy finding physical outlet. "This building survives if people show up Friday and make the case for why it matters more than money. Otherwise, we're done." Marcus looked at Jordan absorbed in his book, at the walls covered in children's artwork, at the space he'd spent 9 years maintaining because it gave families a place to exist outside the pressures of survival economics. The thought of it disappearing into luxury condos made him physically ill. "What time Friday?" 7 p.m., open to the public. Victoria wants you there." After Diane left, Marcus pulled out his phone and texted Victoria. "Heard about the vote. What do you need from me?" Her response came immediately. "Your voice. Your story. The community needs to hear why this place matters from someone who's lived it. Can you speak Friday?" Marcus stared at the text, at the ask embedded in it, at the choice between staying invisible and stepping into visibility for something bigger than his comfort. He thought about Jordan suspended for defending his father's dignity, about parents whispering in hallways, about Sarah telling him to let people in. He thought about the difference between surviving and living, between working alone and building community. "I'll be there," he typed back. Victoria's response was a single word. "Together?" Marcus looked at Jordan, at the boy who called him Dad Hero and drew pictures of him saving the day, and understood that sometimes being a hero meant standing up publicly even when every instinct screamed to stay hidden. "Together," he confirmed. The words sat there on his screen, carrying weight beyond its letters, a commitment that felt both terrifying and necessary. And Marcus understood that Friday would determine not just the building's future, but his own relationship with visibility and vulnerability, and the possibility that asking for help and standing up for something both required the same foundation: courage to be seen. Friday evening arrived with temperature dropping toward freezing and clouds threatening snow that forecasters had been predicting all week. Marcus drove to Riverside Community Arts Center with Jordan in the back seat, clutching a folder of drawings he'd insisted on bringing, even though Marcus had tried to explain that tonight wasn't about art displays, but about survival. The parking lot was already half full when they arrived at 6:45, cars still streaming in from side streets. Marcus recognized some vehicles belonging to families whose children attended regular programs, but others were unfamiliar, suggesting word had spread beyond the immediate community. He helped Jordan out of the car, took the folder his son handed him without looking at its contents, and walked toward the building where light poured from every window. The main hall had been transformed into meeting space, with folding chairs arranged in rows
facing a small raised platform where a table and microphone stood. Victoria was near the front, talking with Diane, both women dressed in business casual that suggested they'd come straight from Foundation offices. She caught Marcus's eye across the room, gave a small nod that carried more weight than greeting. Grace appeared at Marcus's elbow, materialized from the growing crowd with a quiet efficiency that defined her presence in his life. Good turnout. Yeah. Marcus scanned the room, estimating maybe 200 people already seated or standing along the walls. Bigger than I expected. People care about this place. They just needed reason to show up and say so. She squeezed his arm, then moved to find a seat, leaving Marcus and Jordan standing near the back. Jordan tugged at his hand. Dad, hero, I'm nervous. Me too, buddy. But you're going to save the day, right? Like always? Marcus looked down at his son's upturned face, at the absolute faith written there, and felt the familiar weight of being someone's hero when he barely felt competent to be someone's father. I'm going to try. The meeting was called to order at 7 exactly. Diane stood at the microphone, explaining the situation with the careful neutrality of someone who understood that appearing too invested might undermine her credibility. David Sutton had called for emergency board vote to sell the building to Lakeside Development for $8.2 million. The foundation board would vote tonight. Community input was welcomed, but not binding. David spoke next, his presentation polished and data-driven. He displayed slides showing the building's declining infrastructure, the cost of necessary repairs that would run well into 6 figures, the opportunity cost of maintaining a single facility when those resources could support multiple programs across the city. His arguments were logical, rational, built on spreadsheets and return on investment calculations that made opposing him look like sentimentality fighting economics. I understand this building holds emotional value for many families here tonight, but emotions don't pay for new HVAC systems or roof replacements. The responsible choice is to liquidate this asset and reinvest those funds in ways that serve more people more efficiently. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some agreement mixed with discontent. David returned to his seat looking satisfied, certain that numbers would triumph over feelings. Victoria took the microphone, and the room quieted with the attention given to people whose words carried institutional weight. I've reviewed David's analysis extensively. His numbers are accurate, but numbers tell incomplete stories. This building serves 400 families annually. Those families live in this neighborhood. Relocating programs 3 miles away means those families lose access because transportation becomes barrier. We're not just maintaining a building. We're maintaining community infrastructure that can't be replicated elsewhere. She gestured toward Marcus. I've asked Marcus Reed to speak tonight. Many of you know him as the facility supervisor who keeps this building running. Some of you read about him in the news last month. He's going to share why this space matters from perspective of someone who's lived it. Marcus felt his legs move toward the front without conscious decision, muscle memory from years of responding when called. Jordan stayed in his seat, but his eyes tracked his father's movement with the intensity of someone watching a tightrope walker. The microphone was already adjusted to Victoria's height, forcing Marcus to bend slightly as the room full of faces turned toward him, with expressions ranging from supportive to skeptical to simply curious. I'm not good at public speaking. I fix things. That's what I know how to do. His voice came out rougher than intended, nerves making his throat tight. 3 years ago, my wife died in an accident that happened 2 blocks from here. I was working late that night, and she was bringing me dinner because I'd forgotten to eat. The delivery truck that hit her ran a red light. Driver was texting. She died because someone wasn't paying attention, and I wasn't home. The room was completely silent now, the kind of silence that felt heavy. I fell apart after that. Couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight, couldn't figure out how to be a father when I could barely function. But I had a 6-year-old who needed breakfast and clean clothes and bedtime stories, so I did those things on automatic. And during the days I came here and I fixed things, broken pipes, electrical problems, roof leaks, I fixed things because it was the only way I knew to prove I could still do something right. Marcus glanced at Jordan, found his son watching with wide eyes. This building saved my life. Not dramatically, not in ways that make good stories. It saved me by giving me purpose when purpose was the only thing keeping me upright. Every toilet I fixed meant a kid could stay here safely. Every window I replaced meant families had a warm place to create together. My son spent hours in Studio B drawing pictures while I worked, and those hours taught him that grief doesn't have to happen alone. He looked directly at David Sutton. Your numbers are right. This building needs expensive repairs. The real estate value is significant. But some things matter more than efficient resource allocation. Community isn't efficient. Caring isn't efficient.
Making sure families have a place to exist outside economic pressure isn't efficient, but it's necessary. A woman in the third row stood, and Marcus recognized her as Maria Santos, a single mother whose 2 daughters attended art classes twice weekly. Can I say something? Diane nodded, and Maria moved toward the front with the determination of someone who'd made a decision and intended to follow through. She took the microphone from Marcus, adjusted it upward to her height. I work 2 jobs. Mornings at a medical office, evenings cleaning offices downtown. My daughters are 9 and 11. Before this center, they went to their grandmother's after school, sat in front of a TV for 4 hours every day because my mother is 73 and doesn't have energy to do more than feed them and keep them safe. Maria's accent carried the cadence of someone who'd learned English as a second language but spoke it with complete fluency. This place gave them art classes, dance lessons, friends who aren't just neighborhood kids, but children from all over the city. My youngest says she wants to be an artist. My oldest is designing sets for the spring musical. They have dreams now. Before this center, they had TV. She handed the microphone back to Marcus, but didn't return to her seat. Instead, she stood beside him, claiming space at the front of the room. Another person stood, then another. A line formed without anyone organizing it. Families who'd come tonight prepared to share stories they usually kept private. An elderly black man spoke about his grandson finding purpose through music lessons after the boy's father went to prison. A white woman in her 40s described how the center's free counseling services helped her daughter process divorce trauma through art therapy. A teenager spoke haltingly about how the teen leadership program gave him somewhere to belong when school felt hostile and home felt empty. Each story added weight to the argument that David's spreadsheets couldn't capture, that some value existed outside columns labeled cost and benefit. Marcus stood listening, aware that these testimonials were building something larger than individual narratives, creating collective voice that said this building mattered in ways that couldn't be reduced to dollars per square foot. Jordan appeared at his side, tugged at his sleeve. Can I talk? Marcus hesitated, protective instinct warring with recognition that his son had things to say. Are you sure? I brought drawings. I want to show them. Marcus lifted Jordan onto the platform, adjusted the microphone down to child height, while Jordan opened his folder with shaking hands. He pulled out the first drawing, held it up for the room to see. Marcus surrounded by children, all of them smiling. This is my dad saving the art center when the flood happened. He worked every night for a really long time because he didn't want kids to lose their safe place. Jordan's voice came out small but steady, 6-year-old seriousness confronting a room full of adults. Some people said my dad needed help because we're poor. But we're not poor. We're just regular. And my dad is a hero because heroes help people even when it's hard. He held up another drawing, this one showing the art center building with hearts around it. This place made my dad believe he could still do good things after my mom died. If it goes away, where will other dads go when they're sad? Where will kids go when they need somewhere safe? Jordan looked directly at David Sutton with the unself-conscious directness of children who hadn't learned that challenging authority required softening. You said the building costs too much money,
But how much money does it cost when a kid doesn't have anywhere to go? My teacher says you can't put a price on feeling safe.
I think she's right. The room erupted in applause, people standing, and Jordan looked startled by the response before breaking into his gap-toothed smile. Marcus lifted him down, held him close while emotions he couldn't name pressed against his chest. Victoria returned to the microphone, waited for the applause to fade. I've heard what this community is saying. The question becomes, are we willing to back up our words with action? She paused, let the question settle. The foundation board will vote tonight on David's proposal to sell. But I'm proposing an alternative. What if this community bought the building? What if we raised the money to purchase it outright, established a cooperative ownership structure where families have direct say in operations? Murmurs rippled through the crowd, skepticism mixing with interest. Victoria continued. Lakeside Development offered $8.2 million. I'm proposing the community raise half that amount, $4.1 million, and the Brennan Foundation will match dollar for dollar. That gives us the $8.2 million to purchase the building, with additional funding to establish an endowment for maintenance and operations. David stood, voice cutting through the murmurs. That's an absurd timeline. You're talking about raising $4 million from a community that uses this center precisely because they can't afford expensive programs elsewhere. I'm talking about 2 weeks. 14 days for this community to prove this building matters enough to fight for it. Victoria's expression was steel covered in velvet. If they raise the money, the foundation matches and we purchase the building. If they don't, we vote on your proposal. Fair? David's expression suggested he thought it was anything but fair, but he couldn't argue against giving the community a chance without looking like he opposed democratic process. Fine. 2 weeks. When they fall short, we move forward with the sale. The meeting dissolved into chaos as families clustered in groups discussing fundraising strategies. Marcus found himself surrounded by parents asking what they could do, how they could help, whether he thought this was possible. He deflected most questions to Victoria, who moved through the crowd with the efficiency of someone used to organizing collective action. Grace appeared with Jordan, put her hand on Marcus's shoulder. That was brave, both of you. Jordan was still clutching his folder of drawings, looking simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated. Marcus lifted him up despite protests that he was too big to be carried, held his son's weight against his chest while the crowd swirled around them, making plans. Victoria extracted herself from a conversation about organizing kids' art auctions, moved toward Marcus with an expression that held both triumph and exhaustion. Can we talk outside? Marcus handed Jordan to Grace, followed Victoria into the cold night air where their breath formed clouds, and the promised snow was finally starting to fall in lazy flakes. The parking lot had emptied slightly, but cars still remained, families inside continuing conversations that would shape the next 2 weeks. Thank you for speaking. I know that cost you something. Marcus shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude for doing what felt necessary. Jordan's the one who changed the room. I just provided context. You provided more than context. You gave permission for everyone else to share their stories. Victoria pulled her coat tighter against the wind. I meant what I said about the match. $4.1 million in 14 days. It's ambitious, but possible if the community mobilizes. And if we fall short? Then David gets his vote and we lose this building. She met his eyes directly. I need you to help coordinate. You know these families. You know what motivates them. I can provide infrastructure and fundraising expertise, but this has to be community-driven to work. Marcus thought about the next 2 weeks, about the time it would require on top of his existing job and the consultant work he'd just agreed to start. Thought about Jordan needing his father present, about the careful balance he'd been maintaining between survival and living that felt increasingly precarious. I'll do it, but I need help. Can't be just me and you. I'll put together a team. Parents, staff, community leaders. We'll divide responsibilities and meet daily to track progress. Victoria's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it, frowned. Media already picked up the story. Channel 7 wants interviews. Let other people do the interviews. I've had enough visibility. Agreed. Maria Santos would be good, and maybe some of the other parents who spoke tonight. She typed something into her phone, then looked back at Marcus. Go home. Get sleep. Tomorrow, we start building something that proves community matters more than capital. Marcus returned inside to collect Jordan, found his son asleep in Grace's lap while she talked quietly with Diane about organizing a phone tree to coordinate volunteers. He lifted Jordan carefully, thanked Grace for staying, and carried his son to the car through snow that was accumulating faster than earlier flakes suggested. The drive home was quiet, except for Jordan's occasional sleep murmurs. Marcus's mind was already running through logistics, fundraising categories, timeline milestones, communication strategies. He'd never organized anything larger than work crews for building repairs, but the principles felt similar. Identify tasks, assign responsibilities, track progress toward measurable goals. Jordan woke slightly when Marcus carried him inside, mumbled something about being a good helper before falling back asleep. Marcus got him into pajamas, tucked him into bed with Sarah's blanket, stood watching the rise and fall of his son's breathing until his own heart rate settled to something approaching normal. The next 14 days blurred into continuous motion. Victoria set up command center in the Arts Center's administrative office, walls covered in whiteboards tracking fundraising streams and volunteer assignments. Marcus divided his time between his regular facilities work and coordination meetings that ran until midnight most nights. The community response exceeded everyone's expectations. Kids organized art auction showcasing work created in center programs, pieces ranging from finger paintings to sophisticated sculptures. Maria Santos's daughters sold 47 pieces in the first weekend, raising $18,000. Local businesses contributed, motivated by a combination of tax benefits and genuine community investment. The owner of the bodega 3 blocks away donated $5,000 and organized a fundraising dinner that brought in another $12,000. A GoFundMe campaign went viral after someone shared Jordan's speech on social media. The video showed him holding up his drawings, explaining why his dad was a hero and why the building mattered. Comments poured in from across the country, people contributing $20 or $50 or sometimes thousands, moved by a 6-year-old's earnest defense of community space. Jordan's entire first-grade class organized a lemonade stand despite November temperatures, bundled in winter coats while selling hot chocolate and cookies instead of summer drinks. They raised $3,200 over a single weekend, every child convinced they were saving the world, one cup at a time. Marcus tracked the numbers obsessively, watching them climb with mixture of hope and disbelief. By day 7, they'd raised $280,000. By day 10, $415,000. The pace was exponential, momentum building as early success convinced skeptics that the goal was achievable. David Sutton remained conspicuously absent from the center during the fundraising push, but his presence was felt through pointed comments to local media about financial irresponsibility and emotional decision-making. He gave an interview to the Tribune, suggesting the community was being manipulated by people who didn't understand real estate economics. Marcus ignored him, focused instead on the families showing up daily with contributions ranging from $5 to $5,000. A retired teacher donated her entire pension surplus, explaining that she'd spent 40 years in education and understood the value of spaces where children could discover themselves. A construction company owner offered materials and labor for future repairs, calculating the value at $75,000. Every contribution was logged, acknowledged, added to the total climbing toward the $4.1 million goal. Victoria worked beside Marcus through the long days, her organizational skills transforming chaos into coordinated campaign. She secured matching grants from corporate foundations, negotiated with local banks for donation processing, managed media interviews with parents who were willing to share their stories. Her competence was absolute, but never overbearing.
leaving space for community leadership while providing infrastructure that made success possible. They developed a rhythm, Victoria and Marcus, working in tandem without needing extensive discussion about who handled which tasks. She managed external relationships while he coordinated internal operations. She spoke to donors with institutional resources while he connected with families contributing grocery money because they believed in the cause.
The partnership worked because they trusted each other's judgment and stayed focused on shared goal rather than individual credit. On day 13, with less than 24 hours remaining, the total stood at $3,960,000, $140,000 short. Marcus sat in the command center at 11 p.m., staring at the number, exhausted and uncertain how to close the gap. They'd contacted every business, reached out to every foundation, activated every network available. The community had given more than anyone thought possible, but possible might not be enough. Victoria was on the phone with someone in California, a potential donor who'd seen the viral video and was considering a contribution. Marcus listened to her pitch with half his attention, while the other half calculated whether they could push the deadline, whether the foundation board would accept near success as good enough.
She ended the call, set down her phone with careful precision.
They're thinking about it. Might have an answer by morning.
We need $140,000 by 7 p.m. tomorrow.
I know.
She rubbed her eyes, exhaustion showing through the professional polish.
I've called in every favor I have. David's laughing at us. He sent me an email an hour ago saying he'd already drafted the sale agreement.
Marcus stood, moved to the window overlooking the parking lot where a few cars still remained belonging to volunteers working late. We've raised $4 million in 13 days. Even if we fall short, that's extraordinary.
Extraordinary doesn't buy the building.
No, but it proves the community cares. That has value even if we lose the vote.
Victoria joined him at the window, standing close enough that he could feel her warmth. You're more optimistic than I expected.
Not optimistic, just aware that we've already accomplished something important, regardless of tomorrow's outcome. He turned to face her directly. You gave this community a reason to organize. That doesn't disappear if we lose the building.
I didn't give them anything. You did.
Her expression shifted to something softer than he'd seen before.
You stood up and told the truth about grief and purpose and why this place matters. That's what mobilized everyone else.
Jordan's speech is what mobilized people.
Jordan's speech worked because you taught him that caring about community isn't weakness.
She hesitated, then continued with the careful articulation of someone saying something that mattered.
I need to tell you something. This wasn't just about saving the center or helping the community. It was about you.
Marcus felt something shift in the air between them, awareness that this conversation was moving into territory they'd both been avoiding. What do you mean? I watched you for 6 months because I saw my husband in you. The quiet competence, the self-sacrifice, the refusal to ask for help even when drowning. I thought if I could get you to accept support, maybe it would somehow make up for failing to save him. Her voice cracked slightly. But somewhere in the last month, I stopped seeing you as a proxy for my husband. I started seeing you as yourself, as someone I admire, someone I care about, more than I should given our professional relationship. Marcus absorbed this confession, feeling his way toward response that honored both her honesty and his own uncertainty. Say it again. She looked startled. What? The part about seeing me. Say it again. Victoria's eyes filled with tears she was too tired to hide. I see you, Marcus, not as a project or a mission or a way to assuage my guilt. I see you as a man who shows up every day and does the work even when it's hard. As a father who raises his son with integrity. As someone who makes me want to be braver than I've been since my husband died. Marcus reached for her hand without thinking, felt her fingers wrap around his. Sarah used to tell me that love doesn't replace love, it adds to it. That the heart expands to make room for new people without erasing who came before. He paused, making sure he meant what he was about to say. You're not replacing her. You're not competing with her memory. You're adding to us. If that's something you want.
Is it something you want?
I think so. I'm scared of it, but I think I want it anyway.
Victoria moved closer, and Marcus was suddenly aware of how small the space between them had become, how easy it would be to close the remaining distance. But before either of them could make that choice, the office door opened and Jordan walked in, rubbing sleep from his eyes.
Dad? Miss Grace said I could come find you.
Marcus stepped back from Victoria, creating appropriate distance while his heart hammered against his ribs.
What are you doing awake, buddy? It's past 11.
I had a dream about the building. We saved it in my dream.
Jordan looked between Marcus and Victoria with the observational skills of someone young enough to see what adults tried to hide.
Were you kissing? It's okay if you were. Mom wouldn't mind.
Victoria laughed, surprise and emotion mixing into sound that was half sob.
We weren't kissing, but thank you for the permission. You should kiss. You like each other.
Jordan moved to the couch in the corner, pulled Sarah's blanket from his backpack with the pragmatism of someone who'd come prepared to stay.
Can I sleep here while you work?
Marcus exchanged a glance with Victoria, saw his own mixture of amusement and tenderness reflected back.
Yeah, buddy. Curl up right there.
Jordan settled onto the couch, wrapped himself in the blanket that carried his mother's memory.
Will you read me a story first?
Victoria answered before Marcus could.
I can read to you if you want. Your dad has work to finish.
Jordan considered this, then nodded and pulled a picture book from his backpack. Victoria sat beside him, took the book, and began reading with the hesitant cadence of someone learning a skill through practice. Jordan's eyes tracked her face while she read, evaluating, and something in his expression softened into acceptance.
You're good at this. Mom would like you.
Victoria's voice broke mid-sentence, tears finally spilling over despite her attempts at control. Marcus moved to the couch, sat on Jordan's other side, and his son reached for both their hands with the casual confidence of someone who trusted the adults in his life to navigate difficult emotions.
It's okay to cry.
Dad cries sometimes too.
He thinks I don't know, but I do.
Jordan squeezed Victoria's hand.
Crying means you care. That's what Ms. Grace says.
Victoria set down the book, wiped her eyes with her free hand.
Your dad raised an incredibly wise kid. He's the best dad ever. Are you going to be part of our family now?
The question hung in the air, requiring answer that neither adult was fully prepared to give. Marcus found his voice first.
We're figuring that out, buddy. Is it okay with you if we do?
Yeah. Mom would want Dad to have someone to talk to when I'm asleep. And you make him smile more than he used to.
Victoria looked at Marcus over Jordan's head, silent communication passing between them about territory they'd crossed and couldn't uncross, about possibilities opening that felt terrifying and necessary in equal measure.
I'd like to be part of your family, if you'll have me.
Jordan nodded like this solved everything, snuggled deeper into his blanket, and demanded the rest of the story.
Victoria finished reading, her voice steadier now, while Marcus sat beside them,
feeling the shape of his life rearranging into configuration he hadn't planned, but couldn't quite resist. By the time the story ended, Jordan was asleep. Victoria set the book aside, careful not to disturb him.
I should go. Let you both get rest before tomorrow.
Or you could stay. Help me finish the last donor calls. Jordan's out for the night. She stayed.
They worked side by side until 3 a.m., making calls to the West Coast where it was still evening, sending emails to foundations that might respond by morning. The total crept upward. 4,020,000, 4,055,000, 4,078,000. At 3:45, Victoria's phone rang with a California number. She answered, listened for 90 seconds, then ended the call, with hands shaking slightly. That was the donor from earlier. Tech entrepreneur who sold his company last year.
He watched Jordan's speech video. He's wiring $125,000. He says his own father was a widower who raised him alone, and he wishes someone had recognized his dad's sacrifices the way we're recognizing yours. Marcus did the math, felt relief flood through him. That puts us at 4,203,000. We did it. The community did it. We just provided the framework. They sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the magnitude of what had just happened. Jordan slept on the couch, unaware that his speech had reached across the country and moved someone to close the funding gap. Victoria was crying again, quiet tears that she made no effort to hide now. My husband would have loved this. He believed in community investment, in people over profit. He just couldn't see it applying to himself. Marcus took her hand again, held it with the certainty of someone who'd decided that risk was worth potential reward. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you made me take the risk of being visible. I'm glad Jordan mics you and that you're learning to read bedtime stories. I'm glad for all of it, even though it scares me. I'm glad too. She leaned against him, exhaustion and emotion combining into vulnerability that felt like gift. What happens now? Now we tell the community they saved their building. We structure the cooperative ownership. We vote down David's proposal. And we figure out what comes next for us. In that order? In exactly that order. The board vote took place the following evening in the same hall that had hosted the community meeting 2 weeks earlier. This time, the room was even more packed, families who'd contributed standing against walls and sitting in aisles, waiting to see if their effort had been enough. Victoria presented the fundraising totals with slides showing every contribution from the $3 donation from a first grader's allowance to the $125,000 from the California entrepreneur. The final number sat there in bold font. $4,203,000. The Brennan Foundation will match this amount dollar for dollar, giving us $8,406,000, more than enough to purchase the building and establish an operating endowment. Victoria paused, let the numbers sink in. The community has spoken. The question is whether this board will listen. David Sutton made one final argument about fiscal responsibility and efficient resource allocation, but his words felt hollow against the evidence of community commitment displayed on the screen. The vote was called. 6 board members voted to accept the community purchase plan. 1 voted to proceed with the sale to Lakeside Development. David Sutton resigned his board position effective immediately, left the meeting without speaking to anyone, disappeared from the center's operations entirely. Marcus felt no triumph at his departure, just relief that the obstacle had removed itself. The room erupted in celebration, families embracing and children cheering, and the specific joy that came from collective victory. Marcus stood beside Victoria on the platform, watching the reaction, and felt Jordan crash into his legs with the force of an enthusiastic 6-year-old who understood that something important had happened. "We did it, Dad Hero! We saved our place!" "We did, buddy. You and me and everyone in this room." Victoria knelt to Jordan's level. "You should know that your speech was the thing that made this possible. People across the country saw you defending your dad in this building, and they wanted to help." Jordan beamed, gap-toothed smile wide enough to split his face. "Does that make me a hero too?" "Yeah, I think it does." The celebration continued into the evening, families lingering in the space they'd collectively saved. Marcus moved through the crowd accepting congratulations and deflecting credit, redirecting gratitude toward Victoria and the volunteers who'd done the actual work of organizing fundraising streams. Grace found him near midnight when the crowd had finally thinned. "Your wife would be proud of all of this." "You think?" "I know. Sarah believed in community. She believed in you. She'd love seeing you let people in." Grace patted his arm. "And she'd approve of Victoria. Don't think I haven't noticed what's growing there." Marcus felt heat rise to his face. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to people who pay attention, which means Jordan knows and everyone else will figure it out soon enough." She smiled. "It's good, Marcus. You deserve to be happy. Sarah would want that for you."
6 months later, Marcus stood in Victoria's office at the Foundation headquarters with revised program proposals and implementation timeline for the Invisible Families Initiative. The program had launched 3 months earlier, serving 47 families in its first cohort with comprehensive support that included childcare, job training, financial literacy workshops, and peer support groups. The data showed 92% retention, with families reporting significant improvements in stress levels and economic stability. Victoria reviewed the expansion proposal with the careful attention she brought to everything, making notes in margins and asking clarifying questions that improved the plan. Jordan was asleep on the office couch, worn out from the school day and the aftercare program that now ran at the Arts Center 5 days a week. He'd grown comfortable in this space over the months, treating Victoria's office like an extension of home in the way that children do when adults in their lives maintain consistent presence. Victoria set down the proposal, looked across the desk at Marcus. "This is excellent work. I'm recommending expansion to 6 centers nationally. We have the funding, and your model is replicable."
"Our model? You designed half of this."
"I provided framework. You provided the understanding of what families actually need." She stood, moved around the desk to stand closer to him. "I need to tell you something." Marcus felt his pulse quicken, familiar response to Victoria's proximity that still caught him off guard.
"What?"
"This wasn't just about the center, or the programs." She paused, gathering courage. "It was about you." He smiled slightly, memory of similar conversation 6 months earlier.
"Say it again."
"What?"
"The part about seeing me." Victoria's expression shifted to understanding, mixed with affection.
"I see you, Marcus. Not as a project or mission. As a man I admire. Someone I care about. Someone I'm falling in love with, even though it terrifies me." Marcus stood, closed the distance between them with deliberate intention. "Sarah taught me that love doesn't replace love. It adds to it. You're not competing with her memory. You're just making room beside it. Is that okay with you?"
"Yeah, more than okay."
He kissed her then, gentle and tentative, aware of Jordan sleeping 6 feet away and the significance of the moment. Victoria's hands found his face, holding him like he might disappear if she let go. When they pulled apart, Jordan was watching them with sleepy eyes and satisfied expression. "Finally. I was wondering when you'd figure it out." Victoria laughed, embarrassment and joy mixing together. "How long have you been awake?" "Long enough." Jordan sat up, rubbed his eyes.
"You love each other, right? It's okay to say it."
Marcus glanced at Victoria, saw his own uncertainty reflected back. They hadn't said those words yet, had been dancing around them for months while building trust through actions instead of declarations. But Jordan's directness demanded honesty. "Yeah, buddy. I think we do." "Good. Can Victoria stay for bedtime story tonight?" Victoria looked at Marcus, silently asking permission to say yes. He nodded, and she turned back to Jordan. "I'd love to. What story?" "The one about the knight who saves the kingdom. Dad reads it good, but you do different voices that make it funny." They left the office together, Marcus driving while Victoria sat in passenger seat, and Jordan narrated his entire day from the back seat, with enthusiasm that suggested nothing was more interesting than first-grade social dynamics. At the apartment, Jordan ran ahead to pick out pajamas while Marcus and Victoria stood in the kitchen with the easy familiarity of people who'd learned each other's rhythms. "This is nice." Victoria was setting the table for 3, action that had become routine over the past few months. Feeling like part of something instead of watching from outside. Sarah's photo is still on the mantel. That's not changing. I don't want it to change. She's part of your story, part of what makes you who you are. Victoria set down the last fork, turned to face him directly. I'm not trying to replace her. I'm trying to honor her by helping you and Jordan live fully instead of just surviving. Marcus pulled her close, rested his chin on top of her head. You're doing that. Every day. Jordan appeared in his Spider-Man pajamas, carrying 3 books instead of the agreed-upon 1. Can we read all of these? Not tonight. Pick your favorite.
Jordan selected the night story, climbed onto the couch, and patted the spaces beside him for the adults to sit. Victoria took the book, settled into her spot, and began reading with confidence that had developed over months of practice. Her voices for different characters made Jordan giggle, and Marcus watched them together, feeling something settle in his chest that felt like permission to move forward. When the story ended, Jordan asked the question he asked most nights. Dad, are you happy? Yes, buddy. Very happy.
Is Mom happy too? Marcus looked at Sarah's photo, at the woman who'd taught him about love and loss and the possibility of both existing simultaneously.
She would be.
She'd want us to live fully, not just remember her. Jordan nodded, satisfied with this answer.
Victoria reached for Marcus's hand, and he took it with the certainty of someone who'd finally learned that accepting help and building family and honoring the past could all exist together without contradiction. 18 months after the community meeting that saved the building, Marcus stood on the stage at Riverside Community Arts Center for the dedication of its newest edition. The Sarah Reed Memorial Wing had been funded through a combination of foundation grants and private donations designed to house expanded programming for families experiencing transition. Jordan stood beside him, holding oversized scissors for the ribbon cutting, wearing his best shirt and a tie that matched Marcus's. Victoria was on his other side, officially present as foundation director, but unofficially there as family. Grace sat in the front row beside Diane and Maria Santos and dozens of other families who'd become part of the community that saved this space. Marcus spoke briefly about Sarah's belief in community, about how she'd understood that people needed places to belong, especially during hard times. He explained that this wing would serve families in crisis, offering resources and support and the simple gift of space to exist without judgment. My wife believed everyone deserved a place to fall apart safely and rebuild with dignity. This memorial honors her by providing that place. Jordan cut the ribbon with Victoria and Marcus guiding his hands, and the crowd applauded while families streamed into the new space to explore classrooms and support offices and the community room designed for gatherings. That evening, back at the apartment that had expanded to 2 bedrooms with the housing support from Marcus's consultant salary, they settled into familiar routine. Victoria had moved some clothes into the 2nd bedroom 3 months earlier, a gradual integration that felt organic rather than forced. Jordan accepted her presence with the adaptability of children who understood that love expanded rather than divided. They sat together on the couch after dinner, Jordan between them with a new book about space exploration. Victoria read while Marcus listened, his hand resting on her shoulder in casual intimacy that no longer felt strange. Sarah's photo watched from the mantel, blessing rather than ghost. Permission to move forward without forgetting where they'd been. Jordan paused the reading to ask, "Can we get a dog?" Both adults laughed, the question so normal and domestic that it felt like confirmation they'd built something real. "We'll talk about it." "That's what you always say when you mean maybe." "Maybe means maybe. We'll see." Jordan accepted this non-answer with the patience of someone who knew persistence usually won eventually. He returned to his book, and Victoria continued reading while Marcus absorbed the simple fact of sitting with people he loved in a space that felt like home.
Later, after Jordan was asleep and Victoria was working on foundation emails at the kitchen table, Marcus stood at the window, looking out at Chicago lights spreading toward the horizon. He thought about the night Victoria had found him here 3 years earlier. Broken and surviving, but not living. Thought about the journey from that moment to this one. About the community that had rallied to save a building and in the process saved something in him. "What are you thinking about?" Victoria joined him at the window, slipped her hand into his. "That I was wrong about accepting help. That it doesn't make me weaker. It makes the whole thing stronger when you let people walk beside you instead of behind you." "Sarah would be proud of you for learning that." "I hope so." He turned to face her, this woman who'd refused to let him disappear into silent endurance. "I love you. I should have said it before now."
I love you too. And I love Jordan. And I love what we're building together. She kissed him softly. Thank you for letting me in. They stood together in the window, watching the city lights and planning tomorrow, and understanding that the story wasn't finished, but evolving. That accepting help and maintaining dignity were not opposites, but partners. That love didn't replace love, but expanded the heart's capacity until there was room for everyone who mattered. The bravest thing Marcus had ever done wasn't working 60-hour weeks or fixing a building alone or raising a son without support. The bravest thing was letting someone walk beside him and calling it strength instead of weakness. Sarah would have understood that. Jordan already did.
And Victoria proved it every day by showing up and staying and choosing them as deliberately as they chose her. Somewhere in the city, other invisible fathers were working late and carrying weight alone and believing that survival was the same as living. But tomorrow, Marcus would return to the Invisible Families Initiative and help them understand what he'd learned, that accepting help offered with respect didn't erase effort, it honored it, and that the difference between surviving and living was often just the courage to say yes when someone reached out their hand. For the Invisible Fathers, everywhere and always, you are seen. Your strength matters. Your story isn't over. And letting someone walk beside you isn't weakness. It's wisdom.